In 1944, in the segregated American South, a 14-year-old boy was put on trial in a system that had already decided his fate. What followed would later be described as one of the most shameful failures in the history of American justice. So this is not a story about crime. It is a story about fear, prejudice, and a system that chose speed over truth. In the mid-20th century, the southern United States was governed by a rigid system of racial segregation, commonly known as the Jim Crow era. Under these laws, communities were divided not only by race, but by opportunity, protection, and access to justice. In many towns, the legal system was designed to favor one group while offering little to no protection to others. One such town was Alcolu, a small industrial settlement in South Carolina. Alcolu was a small industrial town in South Carolina, physically divided by a set of railroad tracks that separated its residents. On one side of the tracks lived white families. On the other lived African American families, many of whom worked long hours in local mills and factories under difficult conditions. The Stinney family lived on this side of town. They occupied a modest company house provided by the mill, where George's father worked tirelessly, often without days off, doing everything he could to support his large family. George Stinney Jr. was one of the children. At 14 years old, George was small for his age, quiet in nature, and widely regarded in the neighborhood as a polite and respectful boy. At the time, no one could have imagined that his name would soon become part of American history. In March of 1944, two young girls from the white side of town set out on their bicycles. They were curious, adventurous, and unaware of how dangerous crossing invisible social boundaries could be. At some point during the ride, they stopped near the Stinney home to ask for directions. George and his younger sister were outside at the time. That brief interaction would be the last confirmed sighting of the girls while they were alive. The following day, a large search began. Residents from across the town joined together, hoping to find the missing children. Tragically, they were discovered not far from the Stinney home. The local doctor later concluded that the children had suffered severe head injuries. The news spread quickly. Fear turned into suspicion, and suspicion into accusation. Almost immediately, attention focused on one place and one family. Despite reports that the girls had also been seen near another household, those leads were never fully examined. Authorities appeared to be searching not for the truth, but for a suspect who fit a predetermined narrative. George Stinney Jr. was taken into custody. He was questioned for hours without his parents present, without legal representation, and without any recorded transcript. Later, officers claimed that the boy had confessed. No written confession was ever produced. Tensions in the town escalated rapidly. Rumors spread. Crowds gathered. Fearing violence, authorities secretly transferred George to another location. His parents were not told where their son had been taken. Soon after, his father lost his job. The family was warned that remaining in town could place them in serious danger. They fled Alcolu. George was left alone. At the time, South Carolina law permitted the most severe sentences, even for individuals as young as 14 years old. Just 1 month after the arrest, George Stinney Jr. was brought to trial. The entire court proceeding lasted no more than 2 hours. The jury was composed exclusively of white men. George's court-appointed attorney provided no meaningful defense, called no witnesses, and presented no evidence on his behalf. The prosecution relied almost entirely on an alleged verbal confession described by police officers, despite the absence of any written record. After only 10 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. George's parents were not present in the courtroom. The sentence was final. Despite protests from civil organizations and appeals from religious groups, the decision was upheld. Letters and petitions flooded the governor's office, pleading for mercy based on the boy's age. None were successful. During his time in custody, George consistently maintained that he was innocent. On the morning of the sentence being carried out, George entered the chamber holding a Bible. He weighed less than most adults the equipment had been designed for. Witnesses later recalled how small he appeared. When asked if he wished to say anything, George simply replied, "No, sir." Shortly afterward, his death was officially announced. He was 14 years old. For many years, the case faded from public memory, but George's siblings never stopped believing in his innocence. 70 years later, they petitioned the court to re-examine the case. New testimony emerged. Alibi witnesses were identified. Serious legal violations were acknowledged. In 2014, a judge in South Carolina officially overturned the original conviction. The court ruled that George Stinney Jr. had not received a fair trial under the law, and that the legal process in his case had been deeply flawed. His conviction was described as a profound miscarriage of justice. For his family, the decision could not undo what had been taken from them, but it restored something else: the truth. This story is not just about the past. It is a reminder of what happens when fear replaces fairness and when justice becomes unequal. And it asks a question that still matters today. How many voices were never heard because the system refused to listen?